Actively managing your personal brand is critical if you want to make a significant impact in the areas of your life important to you. I'm Garry Browne, the Personal Brand Catalyst. I've spent most of my life working in the world of branding products. More recently, I've been exploring the world of personal branding and wrote a book on this, Brand New, Brand You. And the podcast has come out of this as a way to share first-hand experiences from some of Australia's most recognised personal brands. Jaqui Lane has interviewed over 900 Australian business people, published over 400 business books, written 27 business history books and over 200 articles. She is one of Australia's leading business historians, having researched and written books for the Commonwealth Bank, Westpac, EMCOR, Cleanaway, Woolworths, Patrick's, Peter Lehmann Wines and the Asia Centre Foundation. Jaqqui's vision is to change the world one book at a time. She does this by helping business people share their knowledge and insights through writing, publishing and marketing their own quality business book. There's nothing about the writing, editing, production, publishing and selling of business books around the world that Jaqui doesn't know. She understands how to take the idea of a business book and guide entrepreneurs, company directors, consultants and professionals through the whole process to create a business book that will increase their profile, build a long-lasting legacy and propel their reputation and relevance. Jaqqui's passion for literacy is shared through her involvement in a number of charities, including being the founding chairman of the Footpath Library, a charity that provides books to homeless and needy people across Australia. She is currently a role model for Book in Homes Australia, a charity established to provide new books to lower socioeconomic and remote students throughout Australia. Jaqui is originally from New Zealand and refers to herself as an Australasian. Growing up with 3 older brothers, she learnt early the skills needed to cut through, to be seen and heard. Jaqui has a master's degree in Russian politics, is a keen hiker and scuba diver, and has just come back from the Flinders Ranges. Jaqui, welcome, and what a very, very colourful and diverse background you have.
Yeah, thank you, Garry. So looking forward to chatting with you today. And as you said, very, very relaxed after 5 days hiking in the wilderness.
I'm envious to say the least. And certainly to begin with, the question that probably is on everyone's mind is, how do you define yourself? What is your brand?
Interesting question. And I can actually answer that because I often get calls from people, whether they're corporates or business people, saying, I've been told to call you Jaqui because you're the book lady. So my brand is a specialist book person, and my usual response to that is really happy to be known as the book lady, because rather that than the bag lady. That's how people know me, and typically I'm mostly focused on business books, but I often help people who are writing their biographies or other things. I'm just very passionate about books.
That's definitely very clear from your profile. But then if we go further into it, defining yourself as a brand as opposed to you, Jaqui, because they talk about you, Jaqui, being the book lady as opposed to you, Jaqui, and your brand.
That's correct. So, yeah, interesting question. So my brand, I think, would be somebody who's knowledgeable and caring, has great insight, is trustworthy, is great at execution, who fronts up, who's not scared of stepping up, is energetic, engaging, I think, would be my brand.
So if we take those components and then look at some of the wonderful biographies and historical components that you've had to research to put a book together, how have some of those characters, how have you been able to help them with their brand? Because when you talk about, let's take the Commonwealth Bank as an example. It's had a heroic 100+ years in existence, but there've been different personalities that have run that bank. How have you helped them when writing their history to give them the direction, because they themselves need to have a brand and they need to keep that going and maintain the relevance, which is obviously part of what you try and achieve?
Yeah, great question. And, I'm currently working on a couple of histories at the moment, and that's a very big question that I always ask clients in the very early stages. What are your key messages and values, and what would you like the reader to take out of this? I think for CommBank, I think a really powerful longevity part of their brand was that they're a bank for all Australians. Mm-hmm. Their heritage goes back to 1912 after Federation. I won't bore you with all the history, but they were the only they were the savings bank that most people joined, because traditionally the trading banks weren't allowed into savings banking. Mm-hmm. They were the bank for migrants. Mm-hmm. So a lot of new Australians back in the 50s became Commonwealth Bank customers. So I think they have a long and proud legacy of being a bank for anybody. Mm. So I think that comes out very strongly. And I think over generations, perhaps that's been forgotten, as it naturally sometimes does, unless you're actually constantly communicating that story. So I think that as part of a branding exercise, and Guillaume Swigers actually did a great video about this, saying you can't just tell the story once and think everybody's got it. You have to keep telling it and reminding people of it. And just when you get to the point when you're sick of talking about it is probably the time you need to keep talking about it even more.
It's a really interesting point, because that then takes one to the point of maintaining relevance.
Totally.
If you forget the history, you actually don't know where you're going in the future.
Yeah.
Because that leads and guides you accordingly.
Absolutely. And that relevance piece is also underpinned by the values. Mm. So if a value for your bank, or in this case the bank, is supporting all Australians, that's a strong, enduring value. But unless you're aware of it and the organisation is constantly referring to it and articulating it, it could get lost.
So how do people perceive you, do you think? And if they perceive you in a certain way, does it concern you that you're not being perceived in the way in which you want to be perceived?
I think people perceive me as very direct and very honest, very trustworthy, very knowledgeable, bit cheeky, like a bit of fun, more interested in my cat sometimes than me. I think a very considered person who has great curiosity and intellectual interest, I think, is how people perceive me. And my subset of skills around how to publish a book are kind of a given, and really it's more about the intellectual capacity that I can bring to a discussion.
But there are plenty of people out there that write books for others.
Yes.
But there are some that stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, again, I think
histories and autobiographies, etc.
Yeah, and
that makes, for where I sit, I see you standing out from the crowd.
Oh, well, thank you, Garry. I think it's the intellectual rigour I bring to the process, and the curiosity. I'm currently working with people on a book on AI and ethics, on data analytics, on how to run a psychiatry practice, through to the caring economy, to empathic leadership. So very broad range of topics, and I'm fascinated by all of them.
So does that actually maintain your relevance? Because you're talking about topics that are current and critical in some instances to everyday society, business, etc. Does that maintain your relevance?
I think it's a critical part of it. Given that my mission is to change the world for the better, one book at a time, you can only really effectively do that if you're at the forefront of the issues that business and the world are facing. And I thoroughly enjoy the process of understanding what they are and working with some amazing people who are leaders in those fields. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity and a great privilege to actually be working with leaders in their field. It keeps me unbelievably up to speed and relevant.
So if we go back in your career somewhat a few years back, you haven't always been a historian or a book fiend, if I could put
Correct,
it that way.
yeah.
When did you start thinking about your reputation and how important that was in terms of getting to where you are now?
Interesting question. In New Zealand, when I was doing my master's degree in Russian politics, highly useful, I had a part-time job, and that was helping to research a book on the history of the New Zealand National Party, which is the equivalent of the Liberal Party here. So I got to interview and meet a lot of New Zealand's politicians and political leaders at quite a young age. And I then ended up working for the National Party for 3 or 4 years. So I learnt very early on in politics that your reputation is mission critical. And a number of the people that I met and then worked with, just being in that environment makes you extraordinarily aware of the fact that you are public property in a lot of senses. So you can't just do what you want when you want. And that was way before social media even. So, yeah, from a very early age, I guess, I understood the power of presence and the importance of being able to clearly articulate to a wide audience what you needed to communicate.
And how does that play out in working with your clients, in the sense that I take the view that your reputation is mission critical, not only in politics but in life. And the term guilty by association, how would that play out when you would be asked to do a job for someone whose reputation is not very high and recognised as being very high, in fact very low? How would you go about that?
I probably wouldn't take the job on,
right?
To be honest. I am very careful who I work with. I'm also careful not to judge. So I would make my own assessment based on my own values and what I genuinely think I can bring to that project. And if I don't think it's right for me, I would say so very politely. But I have turned down both corporate work and other projects based on that.
And I think that's okay to say no in the as you say, a polite way. And it's something that people don't think a lot about. I think they'll look at a job or a project and think they can work for anyone. But I think as you start maturing your philosophy and you mature your personal brand, you start to recognise you actually don't want to be everywhere.
And you can't be everywhere. No. And I think that's an important part of that reputation and relevance thing, is that you need to be very clear about where you want to play, and because you can't spread yourself too thinly.
No, and I think that's where social media gets out of control, is that you actually can potentially lose control of your reputation and what you're doing, because others start connecting with you that you don't really know or have had any engagement with.
You know, and you're quite right there, Garry, and we've spoken about it when we were working on your book. And recently I've started researching this concept really around the reputation economy, that everyone has a reputation, and it's now largely digital and online. And it's out there whether you're actively managing it or not.
Yep.
It's really very important for people, particularly business people, but really anybody, to be actively engaged in actually doing a Google search on themselves regularly and understanding what their digital reputation is, because it's out there.
Absolutely.
And it might not be what you think it is.
No, exactly. Totally agree. So one component of reputation is very much related to values, and the area of values is something that, as you know, I'm very focused on and think is incredibly critical in building your and having incredibly high standards to be able to build your reputation. Where did your values actually stem from and emanate?
Well, probably like most people, from my parents. They're foundational. And I didn't really think about my values at all until actually I had my son, because that was kind of an time, I guess, where I thought, well, I've got the responsibility to grow a human being. And so I really kind of spent a bit of time thinking, well, what were the values that I wanted to be able to instill in him? What were the ones that weren't serving me anymore or might not serve him? So really that was the first time I actively thought about what my values were as opposed to, I guess, my parents. And some of them were different,
Sure.
interestingly. And then really I didn't think too much about it again until, in fact, I worked with you on your book.
Really?
And I think chapter 2 was all about values.
Yeah.
So I actually took that, hence, I have a wonderful thing of working with people, and actually went through that exercise that you suggest in your book about writing down what I thought they were and ordering them and I guess reassessing. Some I moved on and some I doubled down on. So I think it's the act of actually consciously looking at what your values are is probably something most people don't do enough.
No, very true. And what about your beliefs? Have they shifted over time?
Yeah, they have, interestingly. I came from a very conservative little small town in New Zealand. Didn't really have much exposure to anybody that wasn't like me. Ended up in Australia, in Sydney, and just through learning and business and interactions, I've had to reassess a number of my beliefs, and very happily so. I do a lot of work in the Middle East, so that's and I'm passionately interested in ancient Persian culture. So exploring other cultures deeply, has required me to, I guess, review and assess what some of my beliefs were. Some I hold firm to, some have morphed over time. So
one has to have an open mind and be flexible and adaptable.
One has to be curious. It's that word again. And I've just read an article about, the decline of Western liberalism and all the rest of it. I've been very aware for a long time that Western liberal values are not the globe's values. There's a whole range of different value and belief systems, and I think it's really arrogant for us to think that there's only one set and that it should apply to the world. I think we would all do ourselves a great service in the community to be much more open to different belief systems and value systems.
Absolutely, because we all come from a different history and past and culture.
And if you understand more about different cultures and systems, you're actually way better to appreciate someone else's perspective and also your own.
Absolutely, very much so. So are there any areas or instances, examples where those values have been tested and those beliefs have been tested in a way that you've had to walk away?
Oh, yeah. I mean, certainly in business, I've had to make some major decisions that impacted on revenue and profitability for my company. I've had to walk away from potential projects because the value system or the behaviours of the potential client weren't something that I could work with. And also, and I'd said to someone that, I've always wanted to be able to walk down Martin Place with my head held high. And so if anything to me doesn't feel right, I've regularly made decisions that have impacted, my business because for me it was the right thing to do.
Is that something that has occurred on a infrequent basis, or is it something because you're dealing with so many different personalities, organisations, cultures, etc., or is it such that you've actually recognised where not to go?
So happens infrequently, but it happens infrequently because I'm very clear about what I will and will not do.
Right.
Probably happens much less frequently now than it did earlier, but it didn't happen a lot anyway. But my radar's much more attuned now, and I get asked to do a lot of things, and I'm very selective now, whereas perhaps when I was younger I was less selective.
Right. Let's go back to branding for a sec. You've worked for a number of organisations in the past. You have a business, you've had a number of businesses, but you have a business at the moment. Let's call it a business with a brand. It's not just a name, it's a brand. How have you been able to separate yourself in terms of building that business rather than just building your own brand, and vice versa? How have you been able to build your personal brand and at the same time build the business brand?
Great question. I guess at a very top level, my business is not my name. I have a business called The Book Advisor and another business called Global Stories. That said, those brands are out there, but most people would attach those brands to me personally. So I'm about to make some changes in my business so that I am not necessarily the key point person for that. But that was a very conscious decision.
Sure.
So I haven't separated the two very successfully yet. But it was a very conscious decision I made when I established those brands. And in fact that I have two that they're quite separate brands. They perform different things and my engagement with them is quite different. And I struggled initially to decide whether I'd have one brand or two, how would that work, just even from a practical point of view, to websites, to social media accounts. Then you add Jaqui Lane in there, so suddenly you've got three. That's a very practical side of it, but completely different markets really, requiring different levels of knowledge and support. So I think being very clear about what would the potential client or customer want to see? How do they interact with that? What are they looking for, as opposed to saying, what do I want to sell? So it's stepping out from me and looking at it from the potential customer's point of view.
Perspective.
Yeah.
Those particular, the Book Advisor and Global Stories, from my perspective, are positioned in a way that really is attracting a certain type of client.
Correct. So if you want a corporate history written, that's Global Stories, and even the name, it's very, attaches to that. If you want to develop a business book for yourself, that's the Book Advisor. Yeah, because I'm advising people as opposed to developing.
And are you looking at any other positioning or developing any other brands that you can talk about?
Well, I've actually, and we've spoken about that. I've actually recently signed an agreement to bring another international brand into Australia. But that's very exciting.
Great.
And that's part of, I guess, the Book Advisor and Global Stories kind of going to that next level.
Terrific.
So watch the space. I think 1st of June.
1st of June.
Is launch date.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So then you will have 3 different brands that you will have in the marketplace that will appeal to different clients.
Correct.
And customers.
Correct. And that will be interesting. And that it may be that we absorb them into one brand, but at the moment we want to kind of keep them a little bit separate to see how they go.
Very good. That's an exciting development.
Oh, it is. It's a bit complicated, but
I don't think so. I think it sounds very clear to me.
Yeah. So, very exciting.
Great. So if you were giving any advice to anyone who was kicking off their career, did you establish, or were you able to identify a mentor, someone who could actually give you some steering and guidance, and someone you could turn to really get some direction in what you were doing?
I was very fortunate that, in fact, people chose to mentor me. So I didn't have to go out and seek them. When I was involved in politics, the head of the organisation, or head of the National Party, identified me and kind of brought me under their wing, which was great. When I came to Australia, and then I formed a business with my business partner. He was a very successful businessman, and he kind of identified me. Actually, I was doing an interview with him for a book, and he asked me at the end of the interview, what are you doing next? And I said, well, I'm not sure. I've got this idea to start a business. He said, well, I'm happy to talk to you. So I guess he identified me. So I've never actively sought a mentor. But I was very fortunate that others saw, I guess, something in me and offered. But I would absolutely highly recommend that people in the early stage, or whatever the stage they are in their career, that they go find a mentor, they go find somebody to give them independent, thoughtful support. It's very hard to get out of your own way sometimes, and I think having somebody who's not a family member, who's not kind of emotionally connected with you in some way, is really valuable in terms of looking at what your strengths and weaknesses are, helping you identify what they are, having that discussion around values, and also helping you to identify what your goals are in life, and then maybe how you might go and achieve them.
Have clients, for example, ended up being mentors?
Yeah, a couple have actually, and that's a really nice, another great kind of part of what I do, is that I get to meet amazingly interesting people, and some become great friends, and others kind of informally mentor, or you develop a closer relationship with. And I guess also I'm now in the stage where I'm now mentoring some other people.
Sure.
It's kind of my time to really start giving back. So, I informally mentor some people, and that's I regard that as a real privilege.
Absolutely. I think it is. And there's so much you can learn from those whom you mentor. It's the pleasure and benefit you get from working with a mentoree.
I've got a couple of younger people who are teaching me a lot of tech, which is fabulous.
Exactly. Jaqui, you've got such a dearth of knowledge, and so many people you've spoken to, you've written about. Who's been the most interesting brand or individual that you've come across that stands out in prominence in your mind, that you sort of felt as if you wanted to keep going, that you didn't want it to end, the project to end, because they were that fascinating, that interesting, and being able to give you such rich knowledge and understanding? and insights on themselves or the business.
That's like asking a parent who their favourite child is.
There may not be someone that comes to mind, but maybe there's a collection of, even in a corporate sense, or someone that actually just stands out.
I'm not sure I'm going to answer that. My latest project is always the most exciting.
No, I know that, but I'm talking about that sort of, because the reason I ask you that is because that actually, to some extent, can help reshape some of your mindset and your perspective on where you might be today as opposed to where you were when you were doing that particular project.
Well, you, of course. No, seriously. I mean, working together on your book was, I learned an awful lot around really that whole personal branding space. I mean, I'm kind of in it, but I've never really, had the time to look into it more deeply and effectively. That's what I'm helping a lot of my clients do. I must say the CommBank history was fascinating. Apart from interviewing all the senior management and board directors, I interviewed Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, all the living Reserve Bank governors. I'd love that project to just go on forever. Meeting an array of really important individuals for Australia, whose policies and in terms of the business has had significant impact over time for all Australians, really. And I didn't really know much about the banking and financial system when I started that project, and now I've probably got 100-odd books on it, which go back to the beginning of Fibonacci and accounting so I got right into ancient history of banking and finance. So I went off on quite a few tangents and have an enduring interest in that now. And so I think as a project, I think that one would be a standout for me. And just because the company and those individuals have and continue to have such an impact on the health of the economy and the well-being of our country.
I was hoping you'd actually mention that, because I think that the financial system is actually a cultural shaper for the country. And it's been through an interesting journey over the last 100-odd years. And anything that a financial institution actually does impacts people's lifestyle, impacts the economy, but also impacts their mindset of the way in which they want to live, work and grow.
Absolutely.
And I don't think people actually recognise that. And so that's why a history like that is critically important. And obviously it must have been a real privilege to actually be part of putting that together, and a great recognition of your talent and expertise that we all know so well, but are very grateful for what you are able to share with us today. And I just want to say thank you very much for giving me the time, and everyone else who's going to be watching this, the time and sharing your wisdom, which is greatly appreciated.
Garry, lovely to chat with you, and we have plenty of chats offline as well. So love working with you and seeing what you're doing in the space of personal branding and reputation. It's terrific.
Thank you. Thank you, Jaqui.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star review and subscribe for more episodes. And if you'd like to learn more about developing your personal brand, please visit garrybrowne.com.au to get in touch or grab a copy of Brand New, Brand You.